Hello and welcome to the introduction to our lessons on the Holocaust and human behavior. And in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the decisions that people had and people made during the Holocaust. So, as we begin the unit, I want you to consider these questions, and you can pause for a second if you would like just to think, okay, what do you already know about the Holocaust? What would you like to learn? So, what are some questions you have? So think about those questions and see as you go through these slides and as we go through the lessons in class if your questions are being answered. And then at the end of the unit, you'll reflect on what you learned. So for today, by the end of this lesson, I want you to be able to identify some of the key terms that are associated with genocide and describe the key events leading up to the Holocaust. And you're going to do this by listening to this lecture, answering some questions on some of the vocabulary and some of the developments that take place. And so to understand the Holocaust is an example of a genocide. And what genocide means is that it's an attempt at getting rid of an entire group of people, of killing off an entire group of people. And genocides don't just start off, at that level. There's a buildup. Whenever genocides occur, there are stages that get followed, and this is important as students of genocides to look at what made the Holocaust and what makes other genocides possible. How is it that people allow government to do this to other human beings? And so the first stage of a genocide starts with symbolization. So before there's any killings and any attacks, it begins with naming and giving classifications to members of groups by calling them names and using symbols to identify with them. So classification and symbolization are universally human. They don't necessarily result in genocide unless they lead to dehumanization. We label each other all the time. And part of what I want you to learn as we study the Holocaust is, how do you as students often engage in similar behaviors? Maybe not killing people, obviously, right? But we also practice some of the behaviors that are associated with this. So it's understanding that the Holocaust occurred with other human beings doing this to fellow human beings. And so the more we humanize the people involved, the more we understand how genocides occur. And so in Nazi Germany, the Jews first get labeled non-Germans. They pass laws that label them as something separate. They begin to have symbols like the Star of David that are associated with them. But they also begin to apply symbols to political dissidents, to socialists, to homosexuals, to Roma gypsies. And by having people wear certain symbols, you begin to divide humans into us and them, right? So think of symbolization as what you guys do at school when you label people based on where they hang out or the type of clothes they wear, or call people names based on their social group. So again, that's a human action and doesn't need to lead to genocide. But what begins to get us closer is when they see dehumanization. And dehumanization is when one group denies the humanity of the other group. Members of it are equated with animals, vermins, insects, or disease. So when you begin to call a group of people something that's not human, when you begin to refer to groups of people as rats, as, in this case, look at the Jews depicted as a fungus, as, animal. And dehumanization usually, calling someone dogs or monkeys, or you associate them with like a pest, a pestilence, a scourge. We usually use terms of undesirable things, right? So when you think of like cockroaches, they're a disease. People, those are things people want to get rid of. When we think of roaches and rats, we think of something we want to set traps for and kill, right? So in genocides, when a group of people starts to label another group of people as these terms, then it conditions people to see them as less than human. It conditions other people. If you're not a member of this group, if you were not Jewish and you were not being targeted, you would begin to associate Jews with something negative. So when something happened to that group, you would be less likely to stand up for them. Okay? Just like as students, if there's a particular type of student who gets picked on or who's considered not desirable by the student body, and that group of people gets picked on or booed or made fun of, you're less likely to stand up for them because it's not cool to defend that particular group of people. And that's when you see bullying. Bullying is often a smaller scale of this dehumanization. Another term associated with genocides is polarization. And so societies that experience genocide, they begin to see the division. The people in power divide the society between the people on their side and people who oppose them. So extremists begin to drive the groups apart. Hate groups tend to broadcast propaganda that's polarizing, that makes people who think differently the enemy. Motivations for targeting a group are indoctrinated through mass media. So when a society becomes very polarized, when one group of people is on the opposite side as I am, and I see that group of people being attacked or mistreated, I will be less likely to say something because I already dislike them, because I've been conditioned to think of them as less than me. Okay, if you think about, for example, if you remember the events of January 6th when rioters stormed the Capitol, right? There was this polarization between people who voted for Donald Trump and people who did not. A lot of the people that showed up to that event on January 6th were doing so because they supported Donald Trump, and for the whole, not only for the election, but for years previously, they had been hearing messages that were very divisive. You either supported Donald Trump or you really disliked Donald Trump. And that became clear at that movement of January 6th. And so when we see genocide and when we talk about the Holocaust, these stages had been taking place in Germany throughout the 1920s and the early 1930s. So by the time Jews start to get persecuted and put into concentration camps, the German people had been conditioned to either dislike Jewish people or to not want to stand up for them. And so we'll be looking at some questions. And the first question I want you to think of is what? And what happens? What begins to lead to the Holocaust and the persecution? So when the Nazis come to power, they pass a set of laws known as the Nuremberg Laws. And the Nuremberg Laws define what German citizenship is. And the Nuremberg Laws determined your blood and your ancestry as a requirement for being German. And if you had Jewish citizenship or Jewish blood, you would be considered a non-citizen. So you were still living in Germany, but you now were considered a second-class citizen. You lost the status of being equal because you had Jewish ancestry. So you lost certain legal rights, and you could not hold certain offices. If you were a Jewish person, you were not allowed to employ in your house a German person, because a German person should not work beneath you, since the Germans were believed to have been superior. That was the ideology of the Nazis. And so persecution begins to take major steps. Once these laws begin to define the legality, pretty soon you begin to see Jewish businesses targeted for violence. And on the night of Kristallnacht was an organization where Jewish synagogues were broken into, burned Jewish stores, had their windows broken. So Kristallnacht means the night of broken glass, businesses destroyed. And it was intended to terrorize the Jewish people. So you should know what the Nuremberg laws are, okay? And so the Nuremberg laws are those were the laws that defined German citizenship and made the Jews second-class citizens. And Kristallnacht was the night of broken glass. It was the night that began the persecution of the Jewish people when they broke into these synagogues, into stores. And this is what begins to lead to the ramping up of violence towards the Jewish people. In looking at this primary source that is found in your book, it says, all the things for which my parents had worked for 18 long years were destroyed in less than 10 minutes. Piles of valuable glasses, expensive furniture, linens, in short, everything was destroyed. The Nazis left us yelling, don't try to leave this house. We'll soon be back again and take you to a concentration camp to be shot. So that was a quote that was quoted in the book Never to Forget the Jews of the Holocaust. But this is from a survivor of the Night of Broken Glass. And so what you're going to do now is I'm going to give you sections from your textbook, and you could either pause and read, or you could listen to me read aloud and then answer the questions that follow. So we'll get to some background by looking at the information that's found in your textbook. So after Kristallnacht, there's a section, A Flood of Refugees. After Kristallnacht, some of the Jews realized that violence against them was bound to increase. By the end of 1939, a number of German Jews had fled to other countries. Many, however, remained in Germany. Later, Hitler conquered territories in which millions of Jews lived. At first, Hitler favored immigration as a solution to what he called, quote, the Jewish problem. Getting other countries to continue admitting Germany's Jews became an issue, however. After admitting tens of thousands of Jewish refugees, such countries as France, Britain, and the United States abruptly closed their doors to further immigration. Germany's foreign minister observed, we all want to get rid of our Jews. The difficulty is that no country wishes to receive them. Okay, so this section is looking at how people after Kristallnacht began to realize that Germany was not a safe country if you were Jewish, that they began to want to emigrate, to leave. Okay? So what made it difficult for German Jews to emigrate, and what made it difficult for them to emigrate, was that the countries that were at first receiving Jewish refugees stopped receiving them. So anti-Semitism wasn't something that was uniquely German. There were other countries that also had anti-Jewish sentiments. So when a lot of people began to want to come in from Germany, some countries denied them. There was a ship, the SS St. Louis, who left a port in Germany with Jewish refugees. They made it all the way to the Americas, but no country wanted to receive them. Eventually, the ship was forced to return to its port in Hamburg, where the Jews there were then taken and persecuted, and a lot of them ended up going to the concentration camps because other countries would not welcome them in their country. So then the next stage becomes isolating the Jews. When Hitler found that he could not get rid of the Jews through emigration, he put another plan into effect. He ordered Jews in all countries under his control to be moved to designated cities. In those cities, the Nazis herded the Jews into dismal, overcrowded ghettos or segregated Jewish neighborhoods. The Nazis then sealed off the ghettos with barbed wire and stone walls. They hoped that the Jews inside would starve to death or die from disease. Even under these horrible conditions, the Jews hung on. Some formed resistance organizations within the ghettos. They also struggled to keep their traditions. Ghetto theaters produced plays and concerts. Teachers taught lessons in secret schools. Scholars kept records so that one day people would find out the truth. Okay, so to check, where were the Jews forced to live in German-controlled areas? So those neighborhoods were called ghettos. That's where the word comes from. It was a segregated neighborhood. It was blocked off by walls that were built, and the conditions there were much more crowded and much more unsanitary. So what it was like to live here was very unhealthy, very dirty. People that were dying would be left on the streets to die. It was very dehumanizing. And that was a way for the Jewish people to be reminded of their second-class citizenship. Then we begin to see the ramping up of violence after the creation of the ghettos. And we begin to move towards the acts of genocide, of mass killing, known as the, quote, final solution, end quote. So in the reading, it says, Hitler soon grew impatient, waiting for the Jews to die from starvation or disease. He decided to take more direct action. His plan was called the final solution. It was actually a program of genocide, the systemic killing of an entire people. Hitler believed that his plan of conquest depended on the purity of the Aryan race. To protect racial purity, the Nazis had to eliminate other races, nationalities, or groups they viewed as inferior or, quote, subhumans. They included Roma, which are the gypsies, Poles, Russians, homosexuals, the insane, the disabled, the incurably ill, but the Nazis focused especially on the Jews. So, who did Hitler target as part of his final solution? Was it just Jewish people? Right? And we know the answer was no. Although Jews made up the majority of the targets, they also targeted homosexuals. You can see the gentleman here with the pink triangle. That was the symbol that was used for homosexuals. They targeted Roma, which are another ethnic group in Europe and Eastern Europe, the Gypsies, known as the Roma people. They were also targeted. People that had disabilities, that had incurable diseases, were among the other groups persecuted. And this photograph here is of the Wannsee, the palace at Wannsee, Germany, and it was at the Wannsee conference where all these plans were being laid out. And you could see that other letter that you see underneath this question. That is a list of the different countries and how many Jewish people there are. So the Germans, as they conquered countries during the war, started to tally up the list of all of how many Jews there were because they wanted to find them all and they wanted to kill them. And so this begins the genocide. This is where the killings begin. As the Nazi troops swept across Eastern Europe, this is during World War II, the Soviet Union, the killings began. Units from the SS, Hitler's elite security force, moved from town to town to hunt down Jews. The SS and their collaborators rounded up men, women, children, even babies and took them to isolated spots. They then shot their prisoners in pits that became the prisoners' graves. Jews in the communities not reached by the killing squads were rounded up and taken to concentration camps or slave labor prisons. These camps were located mainly in Germany and Poland. Hitler hoped that the horrible conditions in the camps would speed the total elimination of the Jews. The prisoners worked 7 days a week as slaves for the SS or for the German businesses. Guards severely beat or killed their prisoners for not working fast enough. With meals of thin soup, a scrap of bread, and potato peelings, most prisoners lost 50 pounds in the first few months. Hunger was so intense, recalled one survivor, that if a bit of soup spilled over, prisoners would dig their spoons into the mud and stuff the mess in their mouths. So how did the Nazis round up the Jews in Eastern Europe? When they first started, they sent mobile killing squads. These were called Einsatzgruppen. And the Einsatzgruppen would round people up. They would hunt them down. They would take them outside. They would dig big pits. And then they would shoot them and put them into the pits for these mass graves. So those were called the mobile killing units. And then how were the Jews treated in the concentration camps? Once the Jews were in the concentration camps, they were worked, right? As slaves, they were fed very poorly, and they were worked to death. They were beaten and often killed. Now, this became, right, if you think about millions and millions of people, this was a very expensive and labor-intensive attempt at killing people, at genocide. And so the Nazis planned what they call the final solution, the final stage. And that happens in 1942. The final solution reached this last stage in 1942. At that time, the Nazis built extermination camps equipped with huge gas chambers that could kill as many as 6,000 human beings in a day. When prisoners arrived at Auschwitz, the largest of the extermination camps, they paraded before a committee of SS doctors. With the wave of a hand, these doctors separated the strong, which were mostly men, from the weak, mostly women, young children, the elderly, and the sick. those labeled as weak would die that day. They were told to undress for a shower and then led into a chamber with gas. So those were the gas chambers that took place. And so in these gas chambers, right, these were camps that were built specifically for killing. These were not labor camps. On the day you were arrived, if you determined you were unfit, you were killed that day. And so that's that's what's called the final solution. And so these camps were created because the Germans, the high command of the Nazi party, they felt that the way they were killing them by sending people town to town, it would take too long, it would take too many bullets, and that it would exhaust the soldiers. So they were trying to find a faster way of killing people. And so that's what these death camps were. And these are pictures from Auschwitz and from Treblinka. So how were death camps different from concentration camps? These camps were built specifically for killing. They were not intended to have labor. They were not intended for you to live there for a long time. They were intended for you to be sent to a gas chamber like the one you see pictured here. Okay. And how were the Jews able to survive the Holocaust? So many of those that survived they survived because of time. Right, when this was happening, this was taking a while for the Nazis to set the camps up to deport people. In some of the labor camps, people survived by just being strong and resisting, by doing whatever it took to survive. You read how they would eat whatever they can eat. That picture at the bottom of this slide was here in Chula Vista. These were actually survivors of the Holocaust that were there, some of the last survivors. Most of them are dying off now because of their age. But some Jews were able to survive. Ali Wiesel, pictured down here in the middle, the gentleman with the tie. He wrote the book Night that many of you have read. So they were able to survive by just fighting to stay alive, fighting whatever they could to hold on to. And a lot of them survived simply because the war came to an end before the Nazis were able to kill everyone. That's for the Jews that were in the concentration camps. Many other Jews survived by hiding in wherever they could, in people's attics, in people's basements, in between hidden rooms in the walls. So there's a lot of stories of survival. So in this unit, we're going to be looking at different accounts. We're going to be looking at what soldiers that were involved said, what survivors said, what people who helped people hide said. We're going to hear from workers that worked in the concentration camp. So you're going to read different points of views to get a better understanding. Okay, so we hope you look forward to learning more about the stories of different people and understand the choices. And the key is going to be for you to think, what made people make the decisions that they did? How was it that people who have families and went home to loving children could carry out such atrocities? That's one of the things we'll learn in this unit, and I will look forward to seeing you all in class.